Hey everyone, I am Nathaniel Rufflejants, and this is Prime News. So our first story today, the lead story, deals with the Switch Pro Controller. In fact, the Switch Pro Controller is now officially supported by Steam, or at least the current beta version of Steam. Here is what Valve released about that support in the patch notes for the beta version. It says the latest Steam client beta adds support for the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. We think it is a great device with a feature set that pairs nicely with your Steam catalog. The D-pad is ideal for fighting games and platformers, and the gyro enhances aim in your action/FPS titles. Now it is notable it does not have any Rumble or HD Rumble support, which is technically in the Pro Controller, but beyond that, every single button can be mapped to whatever you want it, including the screenshot button and all that stuff. So we'll have to wait and see what people decide to do with it. But I agree, it's a great controller, especially if you have like the Xenoblade version that has the fixed D-pad. So it's just a nice thing to see. In case you're wondering, if you do happen to have Bluetooth on your computer, you can connect the controller through Bluetooth to your computer. That, or you can use a USB-C to USB-A or whatever compatible wire, and wire it in and use it as a wired controller as well, just like you can with your Switch. In fact, the Pro Controller comes with the needed cable to do that if you would like to. To be fair, you have been able to use it as a controller on Steam this entire time, but official support allows you to remap buttons that you couldn't previously access because you would have to use it as like an Xbox 360 controller before. So there is that. That is really awesome, and I just can't wait. There's certain games I do like using a controller for on PC, and now I'll be able to do that as long as it's part of my Steam library. Moving on, the second story is a rather lengthy one because we're going to read an entire column out of Famitsu magazine by Sakurai himself, the man behind Smash Bros. And one of the old figureheads at HAL Laboratories. He details out how work hours and long work hours actually have worked in Japan in the past and work in Japan today. And I felt like this is neat to read because it gives us some neat insight into really how work works at Nintendo, because most of his work, even as he's independent now, has been for Nintendo. So here's what he had to say. In the game industry, there's a lot of overtime, all-nighters, and coming in on holidays. It's a practice that has been occurring for a long time. That's suddenly changed in recent years, though. Actually, if you look at other companies, and even myself, 10 p.m. is when everyone goes home. Or rather, maybe we're getting shut out? I go to work at 10 a.m., so I usually spend about 10 hours working each day. In the past, it wasn't that uncommon to work until 1 or 2 in the morning. So compared to those days, I'm taking it easy. Why is this now the case, you ask? Compliance. In other words, companies are placing increased importance on following rules and regulations. Nowadays, this is happening at a lot of game companies, too. I think this is mainly to make sure that employees and contract workers aren't working over 45 hours of overtime per month. This is because of Article 36. So even if a person wanted to, if they go over that set working hours, there could be an investigation for not following the Labor Standards Act. If this happens, it damages the image of the company. It's recommended that work gets wrapped up early, and if the rules aren't followed, you could be punished. I'm a freelancer, so I don't have regulations relating to overtime, and my time isn't managed by someone else. But I head home when the office closes. When it comes to how to do a job, it's best to be rational and not wasteful. The time a single person works in a day can be reduced, and the workload can be shared with someone else. More people should be hired instead of paying the relatively high overtime rates. This will get more man hours in return for the same cost. It's logical, at least for a regular job. However, making a game is technical work, and there are a lot of instances where replacing someone isn't effective. For example, if someone has a unique style or is really good at their job, they can't just be replaced by someone else, no matter how hard that person may try. The person who is in the main driving force behind the game pushes the project forward with their ideas and work, and plays a big role in creating a game's individuality. If jobs based on that unique talent were passed around between different people, in the long run, games would start to become indistinguishable. There are already instances of this starting to happen. In other words, if you're making a game as if it were a manufactured product, then it's not going to be made like a piece of art. If the key person behind a project wants to continue working on something to their heart's content, then it's always going to take more time. As this happens, it starts to lose its freshness, and the game might miss its release date. The risk of something similar getting released rises. Money starts to run out, and motivation drops. Development might even come to a standstill. When it comes down to it, the law is the law. That isn't something that can be changed. So I think it's best not to think about it. The problem is how to continue making high-quality things despite that. Of course, things that can be easily done are probably being done everywhere, but you can't just rely on the existence of exceptional staff. If it's a job that can't be done by a small number of people, then improving the environment and everyone's abilities are the only solutions that really come to mind. In other words, raising efficiency. But even then is difficult, especially because there are many ways to sharpen one's core skills. For example, I think opportunities to see the latest games while at the office have become almost non-existent. Back in the day, everyone at the company could come together after the core working hours had ended and take a look at the latest games, but it doesn't really happen anymore. Time for doing anything other than the job itself is decreasing. Many people now have to look at the quality of the latest games at home on their own time. I think it's best to value time spent with your hobbies and use it as fuel to create good things. What say you? And I feel like this is a very interesting insight into his working mentality and the mentality of the video game industry in Japan on the whole. I'm not going to say too much more. I think he summarizes everything pretty well. I'm more interested in your guys' thoughts out there on what you think about this mentality in this work environment and how Sakurai feels like he's almost restricted a little bit by these working hours, even though he himself as a freelancer doesn't have to necessarily abide by those hours. He does anyways because no one else is around. So we'll just wait for your comments on this down in the comment section below. So the next topic actually deals with the new president for Nintendo, Shuntaro Furukawa. And we finally get some words out of him, some important words on the future of Nintendo. Here is what he explains for his vision of Nintendo moving forward. The one thing we must never forget when running Nintendo is that we are a company that makes entertainment products and playthings, not necessities. It is a business where our mere existence could quickly be forgotten if consumers stop considering our products to be fun and interesting. No matter how the era or the environment changes, the essence of our business will not change. It is a high-risk business, so there will be times when business is good and times when business is bad. But I want to manage the company in a way that keeps us from shifting between joy and despair. As for the question of what kind of company I want to make of Nintendo, this is a company that continues to be integrated hardware and software business in the world of dedicated video game platforms. We work hard to keep the odds of success in our favor, but there are times when things go well and times when they do not. This is a high-risk business by its very nature, and that will not change. But we need to be a company that continues to ask ourselves, what can we do to maintain our relationships with consumers? And how can we leverage our ingenuity to mitigate the risks even a little bit, and never come to the conclusion that there is nothing we can do? Also of note, Kimishima had this to say about Furukawa in terms of why it's a good time for him to be taking over. And it says that Kimishima says Furukawa was chosen as new president because he knows how to get the most out of the development teams, and he apparently spent the last 2 years to map out Nintendo's future. So there you have it. There is literally words coming from the brand new president of Nintendo that takes over on June 28th. Do you like his vision? Do you like his recognition of the past and all that stuff? The more he seems to start talking, the more and more I kind of like the guy, if I'm being honest. But we'll have to wait and see. Actions speak louder than words. I loved Satoru Iwata the person. I loved his accomplishments, but I didn't always like his decision making as CEO. Kimishima, I don't have much to criticize of so far because he essentially launched Switch, and that's been, in my mind, a success in terms of how they handled it. And yeah, so now we'll have to see what Furukawa does moving forward, but I'm excited by this. I hope you're excited by this as well. Moving on, we have some other news I want to touch on before we sign out for today. For starters, a new interview has gone up in Japan where it was unveiled that Pikachu is actually based on a squirrel. And this matters because pretty much for my whole life, I thought Pikachu was based on a rat or a mouse. It very much felt that way, but apparently it's based on a squirrel. To be fair, it's still part of the rodent family, so they're related, but still, based on a squirrel. This is according to people that worked on the original Pokemon games, so there it is. Kimishima also decided to explain why the 3DS and Switch can continue to coexist, and here's what he had to say on that front from the Investors Q&A. Consumers purchased Nintendo 3DS systems in numbers we expected last fiscal year. It has an ample software lineup at a price point that makes the system affordable, especially for parents looking to buy for their kids. We expect that demand to continue during this fiscal year as well, so we will continue to sell the product. Given that Nintendo Switch is a home gaming system that can be taken on the go, this situation may change if it grows from being a one per household system to a one per person system. But the price of Nintendo Switch is not something with which most parents would buy a system for every one of their children in a short period of time. Moving forward, we will work to ascertain what kinds of play people want and at which price points. And as long as there is such demand, we will continue to sell the Nintendo 3DS system. I see the product coexisting with Nintendo Switch at this point in time. And it's important to note it's at this point in time. A year from now, when we're talking about the investors meeting for the fiscal year of 2018-2019, very much so could that be the end of 3DS. Again, he's essentially saying as long as demand exists and it sells, why wouldn't they continue selling it? But if it stops selling at one point, they're going to stop making it. So it can coexist as long as people want it to coexist. And to show they want it to coexist, they have to keep buying it. So we'll see how long that market stays viable in the world of Switch, especially if Switch can, at some point next year, especially in 2019, find a way to reduce its price point to $250 or even $200. Moving on. This is kind of an update to a story reported on the other day. We remember when we said Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze was removed from the Wii U eShop? Well, it has now been re-added to the Wii U eShop at a price of $19.99. Nintendo has not publicly commented or even replied to any inquiries about why it was taken down in the first place, but it's back up. It's $19.99, which does seem a little bit interesting that this is a headline now in the week that Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is also launching on Switch for $59.99. Granted, you get Funky Kong, but Funky Kong makes the game easier, and I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that. I wish it wasn't the default mode, but you can change it. So I'm just nitpicking at this point. I love Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. And the last thing I actually want to talk about is a story we did yesterday. Essentially, the International Trade Commission, through the asking of Game Vice, has started an investigation into Nintendo, in specific into their Joy-Cons. For those who don't know, Game Vice makes attachable controllers for smart devices and tablets. They have a few other items out there as well, but that's specifically what they're talking about. Game Vice tried to sue Nintendo last year, and then Game Vice themselves actually dropped the case in October, and this might have been why they dropped it, because they were trying to encourage the ITC to investigate Nintendo independently, and because doing that actually doesn't cost Game Vice any sort of money. So it actually works in Game Vice's favor. Although it's weird because since it's not Game Vice suing Nintendo, they don't get any money from this. However, it can be used as ammo in court, of course, to try to win an eventual case against Nintendo. But it should be noted that ITC is just investigating into it. They have not dropped any charges on Nintendo. If they do drop charges on Nintendo, what it would be is that they will say that it appears Nintendo has violated patents of Game Vice, and then they will block the importation of the devices. They cannot ban the sales of Switch. So even if the Nintendo can't bring any more across the border, what's already available in the U.S. can still be sold at stores. The ITC does not have the ability to block that. They can only block imports and exports, typically imports. So, that being said, some people got really upset when I covered this story yesterday. And I don't know why. It's just something I want. It's an interesting thing because the only other instance I could think of where Nintendo dealt directly with the ITC had to do with the Wiimotes and motion controls, where another third party was trying to get the ITC to investigate Nintendo. And all that ever went, that never even went to a full investigation. What that went into was a preliminary glance. Basically, someone at ITC got the emails from, this third-party company about the Wii stuff, and they just kind of glanced at the patents, and that's all it went. No charges were ever filed. Nintendo was clear. The difference this time around is that the ITC has an active investigation. We know this because the ITC announced it themselves 2 days ago. So yes, the ITC is not doing a preliminary investigation. They are investigating Nintendo. Essentially, someone already glanced at the patents and said, okay, yeah, there might be an issue here. So now they need to do a further investigation, which is what they're currently in the middle of, to come to a determination. Now, this determination could take many, many months, and Nintendo will probably be prepared in case something happens. They'll get enough Switches shipped in to hopefully not impact supply lines, but you never know, especially if the supply lines are affected when Smash comes out. You obviously might see a hard time getting a Switch for a little bit. But, again, I do want to stress that it's probably and most likely that they're not going to favor in favor of Game Vice. I have looked at some of their detachable controller patents myself. They're very broad, and usually very broad patents do not hold up in copyright and patent infringement cases. And since it is being looked into for patent infringing, I am going to guess that nothing's going to happen out of this, and that Nintendo is going to be free and clear, and that's probably going to be the fork in Game Vice's attempt to get an eventual payday out of Nintendo. Let's be honest. This is what Game Vice is trying to do. Game Vice itself is not a very popular thing. The company itself, based on revenue reports, is not doing very well. So their hope here is that they get fuel from the ITC. That the ITC says, yes, we're going to ban the shipments. So then that gives them some evidence to use in court to argue against Nintendo, to not necessarily beat Nintendo, but get Nintendo to settle and then pay Game Vice a bunch of money to make this all go away. That's what they're hoping happens. And honestly, based on what I know, I just don't think Game Vice has a shot at this. I think the ITC is going to rule in favor of Nintendo, and this whole thing is just going to go away. So I know some people were worried a little bit, and I don't want to pretend that this is absolutely nothing, because I don't know what's going to happen any more than you do. But my opinion is that it's not anything we're going to have to worry about as consumers. I feel like it's going to be resolved before any of us could be impacted by it. Anyways, folks, that's it for today's Prime News. I am Nathaniel Rufflejans from Nintendo Prime, and if you like this video, you know what to do, and if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button, subscribe for more content, and I'll catch all of you fine folks in the next one.